I came home early from a work trip to surprise my wife for our anniversary and I found my best friend's car in the driveway. I stood there. For a second. Just stood there on the sidewalk, laptop bag over my shoulder, looking at that silver Jeep like it was some kind of optical illusion. Nathan's Jeep. I'd know it anywhere. The cracked side mirror he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. The faded REI sticker on the back window. I actually smiled for a second. Like maybe they'd planned something. Maybe this was the surprise. I let myself in through the front door. The lights in the entryway were off. There was a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter, 2 glasses, one of them still half full with a red I didn't recognize. My wife's heels were by the couch. Her nice ones, the strappy ones she wore on our first date. I heard them before I got to the hallway. I want to say I went blank. That would be cleaner, easier to explain. But the truth is, I understood exactly what I was hearing. And my body just kept walking anyway. The way you move through something terrible because stopping would make it real. I opened the bedroom door. My wife saw me first. The look on her face wasn't guilt. It was terror. That's the part that stuck with me afterward. Not the obvious thing I was seeing. But that her first instinct was fear, not shame. Like she'd been caught. Not like she'd done something wrong. Nathan didn't see me for another 2 or 3 seconds. When he did, he went completely still. I didn't say anything. I looked at them, looked around the room, my bed. The framed photo of us from our wedding still sitting on my nightstand, and I turned around and walked back down the hallway. I sat on the couch in the living room. I don't know how long. Nathan came out first, pulling his shirt on, saying my name over and over. I stared at the wall. My wife came out after him, still wrapping herself in the robe I'd gotten her for Christmas. Saying she could explain, saying it wasn't what it looked like. I almost laughed at that. It wasn't what it looked like. I said, both of you need to leave. Nathan tried to say something. I looked at him, really looked at him. The way you look at someone you've known for 15 years. Someone who was the best man at your wedding, and he stopped mid-sentence. They left. I sat there for another hour, maybe 2. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I ordered a pizza because I realized I hadn't eaten since the airport, and I sat on the kitchen floor eating it straight from the box. Because sitting at the table felt impossible. I just didn't have it in me to do normal things in the normal places. That night, I moved to the guest room. I didn't trust myself to sleep in that bed. Over the next 3 days, I did what needed to be done. I called a lawyer. I started moving money from our joint account into a personal account. Not all of it. Nothing a judge would flag, just what I needed to have some footing. I made a list of shared assets. I was methodical about it. I think I needed something to be methodical about. My wife, I'll call her my wife for now, because that's still technically what she was, tried to talk to me multiple times. She left notes on the counter. She texted. She sat outside the guest room door one night and I could hear her breathing. And after about 20 minutes, she went back to the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't engage. I wasn't ready to, and I knew that anything I said in those first days would come from the ugliest part of me. So I said nothing. Nathan called on the 4th day. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, nearly 4 minutes long. And the gist of it was that he was sorry, that it had only happened a few times, that he never meant for this to happen, that I was his brother, that he loved me, that he was a piece of garbage, and he knew it. He cried at the end. I deleted the message and blocked his number. I didn't tell anyone what had happened for about 2 weeks. I just went to work. I came home. I slept in the guest room. My wife had apparently told her sister something. Because her sister texted me asking if everything was okay, and I said yes and blocked her too. I wasn't ready for anyone to have an opinion about my life. On week 3, I told my older brother. He drove over that same evening. He sat in my kitchen and listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is not like him at all. He's the kind of person who can't hear a story without jumping in every 2 minutes. But he just sat there, hands around a mug of coffee he'd stopped drinking, and listened. When I finished, he said, "What do you need?" That question. That was the only right thing anyone could have said to me, and I started crying for the first time since it happened. I needed to not be alone in it. That was all. He stayed for 3 hours. He helped me think through the legal side. He said he'd be there for whatever I decided. He didn't tell me to forgive her. He didn't tell me to fight for the marriage. He didn't say these things happen, or you need to hear her out. He just sat with me in it. The divorce papers were filed 6 weeks after I came home from that work trip. My wife's name came off the lease. She moved out over a long weekend while I was at my brother's house, which we'd planned deliberately. She took what was hers. My lawyer handled the rest. It was, administratively, much simpler than I expected. 15 years of friendship with Nathan and 3 years of marriage, and all of it came apart in about 2 months of paperwork. I changed my phone number. I know that sounds dramatic, but I'd gotten 6 messages from Nathan's mom, who I'd always liked, and 3 from my wife's mother, who I'd always tolerated, and 1 from a mutual friend I hadn't spoken to in years who apparently felt compelled to weigh in, and I was done. I changed the number. I told the people who needed to know the new one. Everyone else could figure it out. For about 4 months, I lived very quietly. I went to work. I worked out in the mornings because I had nowhere else to put everything I was carrying. I started cooking again, which I'd basically stopped doing when I got married. Because my wife was the chef in the relationship. And I'd drifted out of the habit. I found that I liked it. I found that I liked a lot of things I'd forgotten about myself. I made a list one night. This is embarrassing, but I made an actual list of things I used to do before I got married that I'd quietly set aside. Hiking on weekends, reading until 2 in the morning, watching whatever I wanted without negotiating, calling my college roommate who my wife had never liked, making breakfast at dinner because I felt like it. None of them were dramatic. That was what got me. None of them were big, obvious sacrifices. They were just small erosions, and I hadn't noticed them accumulating until they were all gone. I started doing them again, one by one. That's how the 4 months passed. Quietly, slowly, not healed, not over it, but steadier than I'd been. I stopped waking up at 3 in the morning with that sick falling feeling. I stopped involuntarily replaying the bedroom doorway every time I tried to sit still. And then my wife called me. Not from her number, I'd blocked that. From a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. She was crying before she finished saying my name. I waited. She said she needed to see me. She said there was something she had to tell me in person. She said it was important, that she was sorry, that she knew she had no right to ask me for anything, but, please. I said, what is it? She said she'd rather not say it on the phone. There was a long silence on my end. I stood at my kitchen counter looking at the wall. I thought about hanging up. I thought about asking her to email my lawyer. I thought about a dozen versions of not having this conversation. But I heard something in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not guilt, not manipulation. She'd used both of those. I could recognize them by now. This was something rawer. Scared, I thought. Actually scared. I said she could come over on Saturday morning. She showed up at 9. She looked different, not in a dramatic way, but in the way that a few months of hard living will slightly rearrange a person's face. A little more tired around the eyes. A little less put together than she'd always been. She stood in the doorway and I saw it before she said anything. I didn't react. I just opened the door wider and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She kept her coat on. She wrapped her hands around the mug of coffee I gave her, and looked down at the table for a long moment. Then she said it. She was pregnant. She was keeping it. And she didn't know. She pressed her lips together after she said it, and I waited. She said she didn't know for certain who the father was. I heard the words, I processed them. I said, Nathan. She nodded. I said, you need to find out before that baby is born. She said she knew. She said she was planning to. She said she wanted me to know because she felt like I deserved to know, and because. She stopped here, pulled herself together, because part of her still hoped. I said, hoped what? She looked up at me. I don't know, she said. I don't know what I hoped. That you'd? I don't know. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about who she had been to me for 3 years. I thought about the night we drove back from her grandmother's funeral, and talked for 6 hours straight, about everything and nothing. Because neither of us wanted the drive to end. I thought about how she'd sat with me in the hospital waiting room when my dad had his cardiac event, and hadn't left my side for 12 hours. I thought about who she'd been to me for a long time. And then I thought about the bedroom doorway. I hope the pregnancy goes well, I said. I mean that. But there's nothing left for me here. She cried quietly for a few minutes. I sat there. I didn't reach for her. I didn't look away either. I just sat with her in it the way my brother had sat with me. When she left, I stood at the window and watched her car pull out of the driveway, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not relief here, exactly. Grief, I think. Clean grief without the hot, ugly core that grief usually has when there's betrayal underneath it. The betrayal part of me had already grieved that. This was something else. Grieving the version of the story I'd thought I was in. The one where we had all the time in the world and everything was still possible. That version of the story was over. Had been over for months. I went back to the kitchen, and washed the 2 mugs. About 6 weeks later my phone rang. New number again. I recognized the area code, Nathan's hometown in Ohio. I almost didn't pick up, but I'd been thinking about it, and I picked up. It was Nathan. He sounded exhausted. Like a man who'd had a very bad several months, which, yes. He told me the paternity test had come back. He said he wasn't sure I'd want to know, but he needed to tell me. He said the result was, he paused here, in a way that made me set down what I was holding. He said the result was that he was not the father. I sat down. I said, what? He said it again, slower. Not the father. The probability of paternity had come back below 1%. The results were definitive. I stared at the kitchen floor. My wife, my ex-wife now, the papers had finalized, had been with someone else too. Someone neither of us knew about. The whole time she'd been carrying on with my best friend. She had apparently been carrying on with a third person. Someone who was the actual father of that child. I sat with that information for a long time. Nathan was still on the phone. I didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then I said, "I'm sorry." He was quiet. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. Because whatever he'd done to me, and it was inexcusable, genuinely inexcusable, he had also been deceived. He had apparently thought it was his. He'd had months of thinking he was about to be responsible for a child, had been preparing himself for it. I didn't know what his months had looked like. But I could imagine the weight of that. And then to find out it wasn't even his. He said, "You're apologizing to me." I said, "Yeah." He made a sound I couldn't quite read. Not quite a laugh, not crying. Something between them. He said, "I don't deserve that." I said, "Maybe not, but that's where I am." We stayed on the phone for another few minutes. There was a lot of silence. He told me he'd moved back to Ohio. He'd left his job. He said he wasn't doing great, and it wasn't a bid for sympathy. He was just telling me the truth. I said I hoped he found his footing, and then I said I had to go. I don't know if we'll ever speak again. I don't know if I want to. What I know is that I'm not carrying him anymore as something unresolved. Whatever he was to me, and he was a lot. 15 years, the best man at my wedding, the person I called when my dad was in the hospital before I called anyone else. Whatever all of that was, I've put it down. Not forgiven exactly. Set down. There's a difference. My ex-wife, I heard through my brother, had the baby. A girl. She and the father, she'd eventually figured out who he was. Some guy she'd apparently been seeing intermittently for about a year before we separated, were not together. She was doing it alone, with help from her family. My brother said she looked tired but okay. I hope she's I mean that. Not in a performed way, not in a I've reached enlightenment way. Just, I genuinely hope she's okay. She has a daughter now. Whatever else is true about her, she's somebody's mother, and that changes things in ways I'll never fully understand. I spent a long time asking myself what I missed. How you're with someone for 3 years and don't see it coming. And I think the honest answer is that I saw some things. And decided they were something else. A distance that appeared, and I called stress. A quality of presence that had shifted and I called tiredness. Small, accumulating evidence of someone who had quietly left the marriage, while still physically in it. I saw it. I just didn't want to know what I was seeing. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not the betrayal itself, but my own willingness to look away. That's not self-blame, I want to be clear about that. She made her choices, Nathan made his. Those were not my failures. But I can own the part where I let comfort become complacency. For I stopped paying attention, because paying attention felt like a threat to the peace I thought we had. I won't make that mistake again. I don't mean that in a cynical way, the kind of thing people say after a bad relationship meaning they'll never trust anyone. I mean it, practically. I'll pay attention. I'll name the thing when I see it. I won't trade my own clarity for somebody else's comfort. I'm 34 now. I have a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I actually like. I hike on weekends. I read until 2 in the morning. I call my college roommate every couple of weeks. Turns out he'd always thought my wife was difficult. And there's something darkly funny about finding that out now, 2 years too late. From a guy who never said anything because he thought I was happy. I was happy. That's the thing. Or I thought I was. I was comfortable and I called it happy, and there's a version of me that's still grieving the difference. But there's another version of me, and he's getting louder, who is just relieved. Quietly, genuinely, maybe this is what moving on actually feels like, relieved. Not at what happened. Not at any of it, but at where I ended up. I'm on the other side of something I wouldn't have chosen. And I'm standing up straight. And the person I see in the mirror is someone I recognize. That's more than enough for now.